We all have trees that we care about. Think of that tree in your front yard, or a tree at a local park, or a tree at the school that you grew up on playing in. What happens to that tree when it dies? Well, right now, that tree is likely destined to be turned into mulch or sent to a landfill, sometimes even burned. And that's not a great solution. It means that we're losing a resource and that we're really negatively impacting our climate when we're wasting these trees. There's actually about 36 million trees that fall down in cities each year. So we're here to create a new solution where we take that waste, we turn it into something durable, a product like a table or a chair where you can really see and you can cherish that wood, and then reinvest into the local canopies that we really want to see in the cities of the 21st century.
At Cambium Carbon, we use technology to build local supply chains. And right now we're starting with urban wood. Urban lumber is wood from trees in cities, parks, backyards, any place that doesn't have trees that are planted and harvested specifically for value. At Cambium Carbon, we call that carbon smart wood, because we are looking to connect each stage of this process to its climate impact. From avoiding emissions and taking that wood out of a landfill, to repurposing it into new products, to planting trees on the back end. So at Cambium, carbon smart wood means wood that is sourced locally, processed locally, and supports community tree planting.
Being a contractor or a woodworker in any city in the United States, you can see a lot of waste that occurs during the building of something. In developing a project, a lot of trees have to come down, a lot of dirt has to be moved. In building a home, there's a lot of dumpsters that show up and take away a lot of trash and waste. When those trees come down, it's typically put into a process where it's converted to mulch and firewood and is brought very little value to the crop that has been growing for 50 to 150 years. We have been able to work with local tree companies to be able to pause that, send the appropriate wood into those waste streams, and capture the higher value material to put into a higher value stream of furniture, flooring, accent walls, and countertops. In Baltimore, there are a lot of old trees. It's a very developed city, and these trees have been growing for a long time. And we are not interested in logs or trees that are healthy and are doing well. We're only interested in the trees that are already coming down and that are fallen because of their age and maybe disease or decay.
So the tree I'm sitting on now that was at the bottom of the hill that we took down is probably a 60 or 70 foot ash tree. I would guess around 80 years old, but you can count the rings and let me know. Likely died from emerald ash borer, which has been kind of going through the area for a couple years now. Then we also took down a couple chestnut oaks, some white oak, and maybe a red oak.
When we first started this company, we were buying lumber on the open market from wood suppliers. And I don't know if it was myself or Paul or whomever had this idea of, wait a minute, why don't we make this ourselves? When we're spending X amount of dollars for a log, and I'm seeing log trucks go up the road all the time, like why aren't we doing this?
The idea that we're going to take something that's coming from a sea container halfway around the world and put it to use for 5 years, but we're taking a tree that's grown in a city for 100 years and we're just turning it into mulch, just seemed like a shame.
It always is great to, know that it's going to get turned into something that people will actually be able to see and touch and, kind of live around, rather than something that, would just get turned into an invisible thing like, whether it be paper or mulch or something. It's really cool to know that the tree's life is sort of continuing.
We are salvaging around 1.5 tons of wood on average per tree. That varies a lot, but somewhere around 1.5 tons. And we're able to sequester around 2.5 tons of carbon from the atmosphere that is helping to address climate change. How does that work? Well, we are displacing, emissions from cutting down a tree somewhere else and really shipping it in. We are helping to store emissions when we keep a tree from going to landfill or being spread out as mulch and storing it as a durable wood product. So a table is a durable wood product. The carbon stays out of the atmosphere. And then the final way is when we reinvest in new trees. Those trees over their lifespan are helping to store carbon as they grow and expand. And so overall, we're having a really big net benefit on the climate.
To give a concrete example of some of the emissions in our traditional lumber supply chain, you can imagine wood from a sustainably harvested forest that has to be shipped across an ocean, processed, turned into some sort of product, and then shipped back, maybe even to that same area to then be sold. That's a lot of emissions and unnecessary emissions, especially when we compare its carbon smart alternative, which is sourced locally, processed in that same area, and then used in that same area as well.
So we get the logs from Baltimore City Camp Small. They have a facility where all the trees that come down in Baltimore City, it's kind of like a central processing plant where they get dropped off there. We also work in conjunction with several tree companies in the area, and they will call me and say, hey, I've got this log that's pretty unique, or I've got one, this one tells a story. This was in somebody's front yard and the customer wants to do something with it. They don't want to just throw it away. Even on lot clearing things where they're building a new development or whatever, these guys don't want to see these logs go to waste and run through a horizontal tub grinder. They'll call me and see if I like them. If I think it's something that we can turn into something, we'll tag them, put them on a truck and take them away.
We've been working with Baltimore Fallen Lumber for quite a few years now, actually, and they're really interesting because they'll actually take a lot of the wood that other mills won't. Because of how they go about making their pieces, they have the equipment to actually cut some of these larger, more gnarled logs up into, they cut them into some really interesting pieces, whereas most mills are more focused on volume, where they're looking for that one special piece.
We are in Baltimore County. This is our farm location, 80-acre farm, and this is where we store the logs, categorize the logs, and mill them into finished material. We have, like I said, 2 sawmills, WM1000, which can cut 67-inch diameter logs, and then LT40 super hydraulic, which will do about 36. This is the to-do pile, obviously. This is where everything, once it's felled by the tree companies, it gets brought here. We tag it and then put it into the inventory system, and then we'll start picking from this and start making boards and slabs and everything else that we use as a company. There's two pretty interesting elms in here. This big one here is a red elm. This came from the reflection pond in DC. This one, and that's the second cut from that log. If that thing could talk, it's got some pretty good stories. This elm here came from a tree right down the street, which was planted on George Washington's 200th birthday anniversary. The church where it was planted was donated by the Francis Scott Key family, the land that the church is on, and the church itself was used as an arsenal in 1776 for the Revolutionary War. So, kind of a neat story. We lucked out and got that tree. They were gonna buck that tree up for firewood. I got a call on a Saturday afternoon. He's like, you might wanna come take a look at this. They were gonna cut it in 3-foot sections and burn it. So we lucked out. 38,000 pound log.
Urban lumber, fallen lumber, city trees, yard trees, all the same. They provide a lot of unique characteristics inside. Some of them are fantastic. Beautiful grain, beautiful color, imagery that you've never seen before in wood. The reality is it also produces all sorts of headaches. When you put a log on a sawmill, you can only test for metal, and the metal detectors only go so far into a tree. But as you're cutting into a tree, you're opening up history that no one really is aware of anymore. And the things that can be found within a tree that then completely shut down the ability to use that tree are objects like glass insulators, tin cans, glass bottles. We found conch shells, concrete, rebar, steel rods, cables, hooks. And there's truly no way of knowing that these things are in there. And some of these things can actually produce amazing looking effects to the grain. A lot of times though, it completely ruins the sawmill or completely ruins the blades, and it ruins the day because you can't really produce anything from that log after spending so much time getting it ready to mill. So it's a good and bad, and I often tell people that when we're milling logs, every log is like a gift when you're 5 years old Christmas morning. You have no clue what's inside that box, but as soon as you start cutting into it, you can really see what's there. And sometimes it's exactly what you wanted Christmas morning, and sometimes it's the absolute opposite, like a necktie when you're 5.
How's it look?
Not good.
What are you seeing?
That's metal. Hopefully we didn't. We don't know where it is. Just put a fresh cut on the end, but we've got some metal in there, so hopefully it's on the offcut piece and not in the log. We'll find out here in a second. So, well, in about 20 minutes. You won't find it in harvested material because it's just out in the woods. You'll find bullets and stuff. This particular log came from a golf course, so they might have put a hook on there. Some kid might have hung a hammock on it back in the day. Who knows? Could have been any number of things. Green Spring Valley Golf Course.
And what kind of tree is that?
It's a white oak tree.
What are you looking for?
For the storm. Yeah, if you touch the blade, it's going to blade. Wash it? You want to wash it? Yeah.
Get rid of all the mud and the rocks, anything that's embedded in there, so it doesn't dull the blades. It allows it to cut a lot smoother, a lot quicker. It doesn't destroy a blade. Metal. The reason we cut it the way that we did is this is called quarter sawing, and when you catch the grain of the wood between 60 and 90 degrees, where these circles come up like that, that's called quarter sawing. It gives you this pattern. And in white oak, it's called Rayfleck. It's relatively expensive, $12 a board foot when it's done. This log would have been categorically rejected by a normal sawmill because of the metal that we saw on that end cut.
So even if they did take it to a sawmill and they cut that extra whatever foot off, once they saw that mineral standing at the bottom, no other sawmill would have taken it. So that's what we try to do. This would have gone to trash or firewood, but a lot of money sitting right there.
What would this tree be good for to make out of?
Anything that you want out of quarter sawn white oak. A lot of furniture gets made out of that.
Anything made out of white oak in your house?
I do. I just built a shelf for my nursery and a vanity top in master bath. My wife likes it. So this log has, according to the Doyle scale, 675 usable board feet in this log.
And what's a board foot?
1 foot by 1 foot by 1 inch thick. If you were to be able to get 675 board feet out of this, which is unlikely, but let's just, for the sake of argument, say we can, and we'll put a conservative dollar figure of $10 per board foot, you're looking at $67.50 for that log. One board. $225.
Not bad.
If we can dry it right.
So the tree that you guys saw today being processed came from the Green Spring Valley Golf Course. It was brought to me by Carroll Tree Company in Baltimore. And it's a pretty big white oak tree. Yeah, we ended up quarter sawing it, and you can see how involved the process is and kind of labor intensive. And we'll band it up, we'll trace the number, we'll put the number on there so we can trace it to the system, and then it will go be stored inside of one of our barns for 6 to 8 months, maybe a year, and then until it gets about 25% moisture content, and then afterwards it will go down to Halethorpe and run through the kilns.
This is our main fabrication portion of the building. This is where essentially all the dried material comes and we process it into its final product. Over here, we're in the process of making samples. We make samples of all the unique materials that we pull out of these fallen trees. We send it to architects, residential customers, table customers and clients, so they have an understanding of exactly what they can expect out of the wood that they're buying. Managing expectation in the wood business is very critical. Each piece of wood in our world, especially using fallen, is different. So it's very necessary to make sure that they understand what they're getting into and what it is that they're buying. A lot of the tools in our shop are of a much older generation. The cast iron tools that were developed in the 40s and 50s have some of the strongest components in it to be able to handle a lot of solid wood construction. In today's wood shops, most shops don't really work with that much solid wood. It's mostly plywood, MDF, MDO, 4x8 sheets of surfaces. We only work with solid wood, and we're only working with the local material. So we're forced to use equipment that is much stronger and more durable than the equipment that's commonly built today. Everything is done by hand in our process, so there's not a CNC machine associated with how we do it. We're touching the material, we're reading the grain, we're seeing what's actually happening with the material as we're processing it through, and we're making sure that we're able to bring about the nicest final product through the relationship of our hands touching the material, reading the material, and then running the material through all of these pieces of equipment.
For me as an individual, especially coming from my background with music and art, the aesthetic of working with the material that we work with is a really unique opportunity. The types of material that we're working with, the urban timbers, it's got a unique aesthetic to it that you wouldn't see in like as an industry standard. So for me, working with solid material, working with beautiful one-of-a-kind material, it's kind of like the crown jewel as a woodworker to be able to work with this material on a daily basis. So I always have a lot of fun. I always have a lot of fun looking at the things that I'm looking at. It's unique.
I think it's important to be using urban lumber for a multitude of reasons, not the least of which is all these trees that people are taking down just indiscriminately, just because they want their view to be better. You know, these things end up in trash piles, like I said, or in a backyard fire pit where people are just burning them. I mean, a lot of these things, you know, they tell a story. People have their kids' pictures taken in front of them for prom or school graduation or whatever, and become emotionally attached to them. And they don't need to go to waste. We're a very wasteful society anyway. I don't think we need to create any more. Shit, we got enough plastic.
I believe impact has to start locally, but to create a significant impact in the climate crisis that we face, it has to scale beyond that. In all of our work at Cambium, whether it's with a sawmill, an arborist, a furniture maker, or a tree planting organization on the back end, each of those rely on a relationship and a local impact. But to scale that across the country, across a region, maximizes that and enables a significant impact in addressing climate change, building local economies, and building resiliency in these communities.
I'm excited about being with Cambium now because we get to take this to a different level. It's not, hopefully, it's not going to maintain this kind of super niche local thing. If we could replicate this in more municipalities across the country, you're saving a lot of material that would otherwise just go away. The ability and the hope to see this grow into something that we started out trying to do 10, 12 years ago and not having the ability to get in front of the right people to do it, now with the connections that they have, I think it's going to take it to a completely different level where we could never get it just being two schmucks in Baltimore County.